Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Staffordshire Police, Fire and Crime Panel. Monday the 31st of January. I assume everyone's had the agenda. Please be advised that we are now webcast and live. So if we could move to the agenda, please. Item 1, apologies.
I've received apologies from Councillors Hudson, Doyle, Adams and Heeson, and Councillor Heeson has sent to substitute Stephen Sweeney.
Thank you. Item 2, are there any declarations of interest, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If there's any debate on the Commissioner's decisions, particularly in relation to the PSHE, I have an interest in the Staffordshire Council for Voluntary Youth Services, so I would excuse myself from any discussions around that.
Thank you very much for that. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on December the 7th, 2021. Any comments at all on those minutes in terms of content, format? Your agreement to sign them off, please? Okay, thank you. I'll do that later. Thanks very much. Item 4 on the agenda, questions to the Commissioner from members of the public.
Thank you, Chair. We don't have any questions from members of the public on this occasion. We didn't have a specific question from you. Is it Mr. Langton? I came back to you and asked you for the specific question, and you responded to say you were still thinking about it. I haven't had a formal question from you. If you'd like to ask your question now, the Commissioner may be able to respond.
Could you just clarify what you mean by where was that budget drawn?
Was that budget met out of any supplementary grants from central government, or was that money drawn from pre-existing precinct budget? And so an immediate question would be from what sectors of pre-existing budgets was this money for this new category? Which sections of budgets have been adversely affected or to generate the money to meet cost of policing COVID regulations?
So that question's around any adverse impact. Okay, thank you. Commissioner, are you minded to attempt to answer those questions today?
Oh. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I didn't get the gentleman's name.
Mr. Langton.
Langdon.
Mr. Langton.
Ordinarily, we'd have an opportunity to consider the question and come back with a detailed answer. I'll do my best. My understanding was that the government did provide support for a lot of the public sector actually around COVID. The support was primarily to assist an organisation that might find itself short of staff or compromised as a result of COVID itself. So in other words, people who were taken ill or asked to isolate. I don't believe that funding was particularly targeted at underwriting the cost of enforcing or policing any COVID regulation, but I'm happy to go away and find out the detail and work it back through yourself, Chairman.
Well, Commissioner, if I may intervene, and apologies, I think it's, we did hear from Mr. Langton that there was some doubt as to whether he put the questions in writing and given us 3 days' notice. What I'd like to do is say that on your behalf, Commissioner, if I may, that you will write and respond to those answers, to those questions. Because we've got a very heavy agenda today. It's focused on the MTFS, which is incredibly important as far as we're concerned. And I know it's embedding your first year, after your first year, Commissioner. So I'd like to cease this conversation now, if I may. We have an assurance from the Commissioner that he will reply to you. And if you need any further interventions at any subsequent meetings, please follow the protocol that Mandy Patterson is more than happy to share with you. Thank you very much. Pardon? Okay, well, there is some doubt, and it's not on the agenda, so as far as we're concerned, we can't really take it today. So let's move now then to agenda item 5, proposed police budget and precept for years 22-23. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, colleagues, nice to see you here. Just first of all to introduce my deputy Helen, who's along my side as always, and David Greensmith, who's going to help me present this item to you, who's gives us our financial oversight. You'll notice there's an omission. Glyn Dixon, Chief Executive, would normally have been here. Glyn retired on Friday, and he regrets that he didn't get an opportunity to say cheerio to all of you after 9 years of supporting the Commissioner's office. We sent him off with a big pat on the back because he'd done a fantastic job for Staffordshire. Chairman, just to bear your indulgence, if I may, I've asked two senior people in the team, Paula Hammond and Ralph Butler, to act as interim joint chief execs, and I believe with your approval that will continue until I can recruit somebody else. I'm expecting that to happen quite quickly.
Could you give us any indication of a timeline at this stage? Because I don't know what your perception is, a short period of time for the interim appointments.
I think the primary concern is around, we've got to advertise for a few weeks, we've got to interview, and then it comes down to the notice periods of the individuals. So I would hope by the summer we'll have somebody in situ. I'm very confident in the capacity and experience of the two people I've mentioned there. And,
thank you.
And you'll see them at subsequent at meetings. Right, let's get into this business. This is the key piece of work for me as Commissioner, not just annually, but really now more than ever. It's the first budget that I get to bring. I've had 9 months of working essentially to my predecessor's budget, and the budget is vitally important. I've been very clear with the public right the way through the run-up to my appointment that I see it as vitally important that we give the Chief Constable the tools and the resources that he needs, he being Chris Noble, our new Chief Constable, to deliver the services that we expect. Having said that, I've always got an eye to just what is good value, what that means to the public, and particularly at the moment, alternative pressures on household budgets. So the key thing for me is a budget that is offering value, looking to offer good value in the future, and not compromising on safety. The element of residents' contributions is very much a local tax. It's in anticipation of local delivery. It's in expectation that their concerns are met. So it isn't going into some national pot. They're saying, here's some contribution, deliver for me here in Staffordshire. I think the plan that I put together and I shared with you at recent meetings sets out those requirements of the public very clearly, where they feel that the service can improve and where their priorities are. I've brought everybody some bound copies of the plan there, if you'd like to help yourselves as you leave. Hopefully you'll find that of interest. But I'm absolutely delighted to see that the Chief Constable has landed and very quickly sought to not so much restructure, but to change the model, change the way they operate, particularly in terms of frontline policing. And we're going to see a more local and responsive service that will absolutely, I think, give us what we need. And that means a better contact, better response times, better problem solving in our localities, lower antisocial behaviour, safer roads. Those 4 or 5 things that were absolutely top of all the public's list of requirements for room for improvement. Fundamentally under that, they're going to continue to tackle high harm, continue to work with the region around counter-terrorism and serious organised crime. We'll continue the pressure on drugs. We'll continue to look after victims, put them first. And we'll continue to put every effort we can into early intervention and prevention. That's through my office, but also through the good offices of your authorities and partner organisations and others. And all of that is encompassed in this plan to some degree, but the primary focus is on the police force's contribution to all of that. Prevention and, where necessary, right through to conviction. The government has stepped up to answer 2 key requirements or requests from the sector. First of all, for a longer-term commitment to allow them to plan financially. So we've got a 3-year commitment. It's really helpful to have that. I think the difficulty is that we've got a 3-year commitment when there is quite considerable uncertainty around the capacity of the economy in terms of contributing to business rates and central taxes. We've got real inflation at the moment, not just in energy costs and utility costs, which will affect the organisation, as it will all of us, but also in supply chains and availability of certain equipment and things like that. So there's real inflation. Don't quite know what that will mean for the future. Hopefully it's a blip, but it will certainly mean pressure on wages. Organisations, particularly organisations in the front line that have worked extremely hard through COVID, will have expectations around wages keeping up with their increased costs. So what I've tried to do here in the budget is be extremely prudent about the impact of those for the next 2 or 3 years. The picture is not as difficult as it seemed a year ago because of the positive contribution of the central grant. But there is huge uncertainty over those wages, inflation levels and other matters going forward. The allowances we've made for those, I think you'll agree with me, are prudent. I don't intend to agree budgets based on best case scenarios. They just catch you out. You make a decision 6 months, 12 months down the line, oh, that didn't work out quite as we hoped. We need some more help or we're going to have to cut a service. I'm looking for a budget here for 4 or 5 years that says, what do we need? How are we going to come about that funding? How are we going to do it with making the lowest ask of the public that we can? But how do we also take account of the vagaries of life? Who knows what's coming down the line? Let's hope to goodness it's not something like we've had to manage in the last 2 years. You'll see in my forward that I've made 2 or 3 decisions during the year to increase staff particularly in call handling, crime recording and IT. Now those were in reaction to very specific needs that became apparent on my arrival. However, that sort of decision making I see is just normal. There's a budget, there's an ambition, there's a forecast, and we'll work within those headings, but we have sensible reserves which allow us to do that in year, and we'll continue to respond to emerging challenges. I think more fundamentally I want to make the point that this isn't a budget just for this year. This is my view of where we are for the next 4 years. I think it's enough. I think it's enough to deliver the services that we need, and all being well, whilst this year I'm asking the public to pay the equivalent of £10 extra a year if they're in a Band D property, it's very much my hope that I will not have to do that in the next 3 or 4 years. And you'll see that whilst the plan is very robust, we are requiring the organisation to save over a further £2 million over the budget period. I think that's possible, and you as a panel would have heard numbers nearer 5 million not so long ago. We need to find £2 million. It's possible we share more buildings, more efficient use of technology, we share back office costs with our fire and rescue partners, and we start to do more business together with other sectors in the public realm. It's more than achievable. So that's where I am. Chairman, I proposed that David might take some time to take us through the detail of the document. He said he won't get too heavy, but if we get asked a heavy question, we will do our best to respond to it in kind. If that's all right with you, Chairman, could I ask David just to take us through some of the highlights?
Yes, I think we'd welcome that, and just pick up on the point that the Commissioner made, some of the highlights, because we've spent considerable time looking at this paper beforehand, and our questions may reflect the points that we're seeking added clarification on. So I think we would welcome the highlights from your side, Commissioner.
It's always a challenge. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'll try and keep this hopefully straightforward and try and tell the story as simply as I can. I think if it's okay, first of all, obviously the main paper for consideration today is the budget and the MTFS paper, but there are 3 other papers that sit with this. We've got the Treasury Management Strategy, the Reserve Strategy, and also the Capital Strategy. So those 3 support the main paper, so I'm not going to go through the papers in detail separately, so you'll be pleased to know that. But what I will do is just refer to 1 or 2 of the key points that are contained within each of the strategies. So if it's okay, if I'd like to start, Chairman, with just the overall budget position. So the proposal that's contained within the paper is for a revenue budget of 233.1 million. And just for information, that's based upon the local government finance settlement that was issued on the 16th of December. Now, we're expecting the final settlement this week. It hasn't come through yet, but we're not proposing that final settlement will present or indeed include any differences in the numbers that are in front of you today. So in terms of the key information that's contained within the report, so the report includes an increase, proposed increase for 22-23 in Band D of £10. That's 4.19%, and that would take the Band D up to £248.57. Now, the local government finance settlement included the referendum limit for a 3-year period. So the Commissioner within years 2 and 3 has put a lower assumption into the MTFS. So the assumption within the MTFS is 2.99% for the following 2 years. So what that means when we actually look at and compare it to wage growth estimates and estimates of RPI, that actually sits below both of those 2 estimates, and you can see that within paragraph 3.1 of the report. If I just move on as well and just say that in terms of the overall police grant that the Commissioner talked about, the overall increase in police grant for next year is 550 million, of which the share for Staffordshire is 7.5 million, and that's been allocated. And that includes, if I can be clear, the uplift in officer numbers, and it also includes the additional burden for the national insurance increase as well. The good news is that the proposed budget for 22-3 and the MTFS include a balanced position, and of course, Chairman, that I welcome that, and that is positive news. The budget for 22-3 also includes a positive contribution to reserves of 1.3 million, with an overall draw on reserves of 2.6 million during the MTFS period. Now, the Commissioner has already mentioned what that means is there's a £2.1 million saving requirement that at the moment is met by reserves within the MTFS assumption, but the Commissioner has just alluded to the fact that that will actually be replaced by a savings or a transformational target that will be required across both Staffordshire Police and the Staffordshire Commissioner's Office. So the level of saving requirement, just really also to make it clear, is obviously better, and I'm sure the panel will be aware of this. I came to you and we talked before Christmas in December of a gap that was circa £5 million. That gap has improved, and there are clear reasons why it's improved. Firstly, the council tax position that we're reporting to is better than we thought it was going to be. So the bounce back from the pandemic has been better. So the council tax base has recovered by 1.84%, and we're also seeing a surplus on the collection fund as well. In addition to that, we've also got the policing grant, the additional policing grant of 7.5 million that I just talked about. And also we've got the benefits as well of some lower capital financing costs as well. So when you put all that together, it results in that gap that's gone down from 5 million down to the 2.1 million that you see in the report today. So that's all good news, but however, the Commissioner has already alluded to this, and I will just stress there are some pressures clearly within the budget. We've got pressures nationally around pay awards. We've got pressures nationally around additional pension costs that are coming in from 24-25, particularly around the impact of the Sergeant McLeod case. And then, of course, who can forget at the moment there are significant pressures on utility costs, for example, and we're all seeing that increases that are going to come and bite next year. And there's significant increases that are included within the budget for next year. Also as well in terms of good news, in terms of officer uplift, so as I mentioned and is included within the report, you can see clearly the additional officer uplift increasing numbers to 1,942.5 by March 2023. Just before I go on, this report has gone through the Commissioner's governance arrangements, it's gone through the Strategic Governance Board, and also the Commissioner has consulted with across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, and 68% of respondents who responded to the consultation supported an increase in the police precept. So I'm not going to say too much more, other than I just want to pick out one or two points, if that's okay, within the report. Firstly, in terms of, I talked about that overall improved financial position in terms of that overall MTFS gap, if you like. And if I can just point the panel to paragraph 1.8 within the report, and you can see the improved financial position that's presented compared to where we were last year. So overall, what we're in a position where there's a 2.8 million, there's a movement to 2.8 million, improving that gap in the MTFS back down to the 2.1 million. So the budget does propose a use of £2.6 million worth of reserves during the MTFS period, in addition to £2.8 million worth of contribution to the capital programme as well. In terms of headline investments into policing, the Commissioner has already talked about that, and that's contained within paragraph 1.16 of the report. And also the panel should note the Commissioner, since coming into office in May, has also undertaken a review of the Staffordshire Commissioner's Office and has reduced and delivered savings that are included in the budget of £200,000 as well for 22-23. A full table of funding is included for your information within the report, within paragraph 1.2, and you can see how that full funding allocation is within that paragraph and within that table, and how that's allocated across Staffordshire Police and the Commissioner's Office. In terms of the budget process has been undertaken, and there's been a challenge session held with all major budget holders across Staffordshire Police. It's been built up from a zero base, and the Commissioner and Staffordshire Police have considered the key corporate risks when establishing what the budget requirement is for next year and into the medium term. In terms of the preset proposals, section 3 of the report covers off some of the detail around the preset proposals, and just for information, a 1% movement in council tax is equivalent to around about £850,000. So when we compare that to the assumptions the Commission has made for 23-4 and 24-5, that lower assumption of 2.99% means that around about £1 million per year of council tax won't be collected based upon those assumptions. Now, two of the main risks that I've talked about within the report are pay and pensions, and just again for information, the budget, 82% of the budget for Staffordshire Police is pay costs, so clearly where we do get pressures upon pay and pensions, that does have a significant impact. Now, the budget includes a 4% pay award across police officers and police staff for 22-23. And I'd like to point out to the panel as well that Staffordshire Police did not receive a pay award during the current financial year. Now, I know the Chancellor announced a pay pause for this year, but a number of other sectors across the public sector did receive pay awards in the year, but the policing didn't. So that puts an extra pressure upon the pay award when it's actually looked at nationally next year. In terms of that pension risk, the Commissioner has created a pension reserve that will sit at 3.6 million within the MTFS, and that will allow for additional pension contributions, as I mentioned before, that will come in as part of the fallout from the Sergeant and McLeod. But I'm sure the panel will be welcome. I'll talk to you in more detail about that when I do the fire budget in a couple of weeks' time. So in terms of just going back to the report, section 4 talks through the narrative, the national picture. Detail of the officer uplift can be seen within section 5, and you can see there the uplift of 120 officers coming in to complete that picture, taking us up to the 1942 by March 23. Importantly, section 7 and 8 looks at the reserves and the assumptions, and if I can just signpost the panel to the assumptions section on page 18 of the report, you can see there, within there, for example, the pay award assumption for next year at 4%, but then it does drop down to 2.5% in 23-4, and then back down to 2%. But you can also see in there as well the assumptions that we've talked around about future council tax increases and the general assumptions around increases on utility costs as well. In terms of the reserves position, the reserves position has improved significantly, as I'm sure you're all aware, over the last 2 years, resulting in a replenished general reserve of 7.16 million, and also the earmark reserves increasing to just over 20 million. The reserves position is clearly laid out within the reserve strategy, and of course I'm quite happy to take any questions on the reserve strategy from the panel. So I've nearly finished, you'll be happy to know, Chair. So in terms of, just move on to the capital programme. So details of the capital programme are contained within section 12 of the report, and the detailed programme is listed for your information within Appendix 8, and a detailed capital strategy, as I say, accompanies this report. So the capital programme is a substantial programme for next year at 20.1 million, and includes further investment in ICT, estates, and of course transport. I think digital investment is proposed to maintain the improvements in capability that we've seen following previous investments, also to improve the core infrastructure and build upon the benefits of the in-source technology services within Staffordshire Police. And paragraph 1.17 of the report just details some of that detail. The budget is scheduled for you all within Appendix 1, the detailed reserves in Appendix 2, and you can see the council tax information all presented within Appendix 3, 4 and 5, and the detailed MTFS within Appendix 6. Can I also just point the panel to the note on the statement made by myself within section 12 of the report regarding the robustness of the budget that's presented to you today. Finally, Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions, and if I can refer the panel to the recommendations within the report, and of course for the panel to consider supporting the increase in council tax of £10 and increasing the Band D to the 248.57. So thank you very much, Chairman, and obviously happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. It was a massive document to work through, and we thank you for the clarification around what we might put down as a version of the specific issues that we were concerned about. In the context of the assumptions that have been made, we did come to a conclusion prior to what you've just shared with us that there were points in that document that were vague. And we were concerned about that as we started to read through it. Would we be able to get any meat on the bones as we went on? We then noted the risk provisions. I couldn't see anything in under the heading of a contingency for anything, a specific reference to contingency. Now, what I'll do now, I'll ask colleagues to get us off into the question Q&A session. Some of those points that I've just touched on there may well be captured in the themes of the questions that will be coming from colleagues. So could we start that then, please? Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Can you explain the rationale for going for the maximum precept increase when it appears as though the force is in a better position than was forecast last year or the year before, because it's had a better government funding decision and the increase in council tax base, so the force seems to be far better off than it forecast last year. So why go for the maximum precept increase rather than 2.99% increase?
Keith, you're right, thank goodness the government settlement's better. The council tax contribution is better. That's not just more people able to pay than we'd assumed, but also as a result of the pandemic and so on, but also more properties. There's actually more people, more issues, more incidents around Staffordshire. It's a growing place. So that's quite good news. I've fundamentally taken the decision because the organisation has a certain amount of money to spend, to save over 4 or 5 years. I don't believe today that they are ready to do that. I think there are investments and decisions that need to be made, not least some investments in the capacity, the type of people needed to manage transformation. It's also very clear to me that we have some service areas for improvement, and I want them to improve straight away. I don't want to wait 1-2 years for them to improve. They require people. We've heard that a vast percentage of the vast majority of the budget is around people. It's people business. And we've got more people coming, more recruits. There's quite an overhead in training, introduction, getting those people embedded in the organisation. It takes a good 2 years. So whilst some of them are becoming fully operational straight away, the ones that arrive in March 23, it'll be 25 before they're fully trained and ready to work under their own steam, as it were. I don't think the public would thank me at this point if I saved £1 or 2 on the household budget, but they didn't see the improvements that they're asking for as quickly as they might. So I took that decision that we would look to invest the money that was needed early rather than later on. I also think we've got a a new operating model proposal from the Chief Constable, which is exceptionally well received by partners, the public and the service. And I think the staff and officers are ready to do this. To tell them that actually to some degree that might be compromised, I think would have been to really miss an opportunity. So I feel we will be saving by investing now. Essentially the decision was perhaps between 3% and 4%, perhaps between £8 and £10. I think the £2 extra for delivery within the next few months is going to seem the right thing when we look back. I certainly hope so, and that's certainly the plan.
Follow up.
Thank you for that. That's great. Feedback from the consultation process again raises visibility as a major concern for the public. And when we've been discussing precept in the last few years, we've been promised that any increases in precept will result in tangible improvements and increased visibility in communities. And that doesn't appear to have happened. Can you convince communities who will be paying this extra £10 that their investment is actually going to be seen in increased visibility of police officers?
Visibility has been a real challenging. It's actually the word visibility is challenging for me, and has been in the last few months, because it's as much about perception as reality. If you don't see a cop in your neighbourhood, it's because it's pretty safe. If you see one, and you see one often, it's because something's going on. So, personally, I don't want to see one, thanks very much. But I am conscious that there is a significant number of people who find that visibility to be extremely reassuring, and particularly when they're in public places, particularly when they're in high streets or at events, perhaps in parks. So I really do understand the reassurance factor. We're going to have 375 more officers from 2015 to 2023. That's nearly 20% more. A good chunk of them are already going into neighbourhood policing and response, and roads policing. We've got our own roads policing unit now, and you're going to see more. I think everybody will see more of them in those areas where the visibility really matters. Notwithstanding, there will also be some more focused on neighbourhood policing. We've had increased officers with the label neighbourhood policing, but due to the pressures of the last few years, they've actually been carrying out response jobs. So, to some degree, it's not about the label, it's about the practical reality of it. And I'm looking possibly for fewer neighbourhood in name, but far more focused and concentrated on those issues, building the relationships, talking to the families that find themselves in difficulties, really getting to know their communities, working with the PCSOs and solving those problems locally where it matters. I absolutely expect the visibility to increase. I know the Chief Constable understands that we have an expectation, and it's difficult, Keith, because I can't answer for the past to a great degree. I certainly know the intention was correct. I think we're going to see some real meat to that bone in the next couple of years. I absolutely expect to. I haven't written a plan that says this needs to happen for it not to happen. and I haven't recruited a chief constable that I don't think can do it, because I think he can. And it's a case of asking Staffordshire residents just to go again this year, and let's see what happens. I didn't want to overemphasise the point, because actually I think there's still a lot of uncertainty. But the plan here for 4 or 5 years is to increase council tax by less than inflation and wages. That's the plan. Now, that is not the plan around the rest of the country. But I think it's doable, and I think it's possible, and I think we can improve that visibility and service at the same time. But please keep challenging me, because I will keep challenging the chief, and we both want the same thing.
If I could just enhance or make a comment on that question and your response, Commissioner, if I may. We've heard you at many of our recent meetings focus that response upon neighbourhoods and community support, which we're all extremely grateful for. But I would like to see a shift, and I wonder whether you could give us any sort of assurances, and I do not want to step into an operational arena here, but from a strategic point of view, motorways, speeding, you've shared with us on many occasions how concerned you are about deaths from RTAs and dangerous driving. Is there anything you could say to us in the context of how we started this part of the discussion off about drink drivers, speeding, irresponsible behaviours on the motorway? Because I think nationally, we don't see as many police on the motorways anymore. We don't see as many doing drink driving. That's the perception. And there's been a fallback to voluntary organisations who undertake speed watch on behalf of the police. So the voluntary groups have stepped up to try and help address that matter. But it's not the same as seeing a bobby in a car coming up behind you and dealing with it in that context. Is there anything you could do to help us understand how that deployment will work?
Absolutely. Part of the Chief Constable's plan is to retain our road policing capacity. It will stay as a specialist unit. The council tax contribution that was made a couple of years ago to bring about that unit has been well returned on. Drunk driving, drug driving, uninsured vehicles, overloaded vehicles. It's all extremely important to the public, and actually an awful lot of criminals and wanted individuals are found as a result of that work. You pull somebody over and there's often stuff in the boot, or it's often somebody you're after for another reason. My deputy Helen, as you know, is very focused on this, and that's for a deliberate reason, because it's a priority in the plan. She actually went out overnight with the motorways policing group. I think she's recovered. It was only 2 days ago. Apparently when you put your foot down in one of those things, it's a bit alarming, but more alarming for the person they were pulling over for drink driving than it was for Helen. It's absolutely fundamentally part of the budget. No reductions, continued investment. That's our roads policing unit. It's also the CPMG, which is the West Midlands Motorway Patrol Group. That functions extremely well. I'll keep my eye on that because it needs to perform as well as similar operations. There's big advantage to us in working with the West Midlands with our motorway network. They also look after the A500 and the A50, which is important for Staffordshire. Slightly different focus, but it is to keep that visibility and enforcement up on those key transport routes. So, absolutely core to the business. I think the thing that has yet to be explained, because it's so very new, is the new operating model really does allow for more response activity, more roads activity, more capacity at the disposal of each local commander than we've had with the current model. So I think you're going to see even more of that. And we want to grow the volunteers. Where there's volunteers who want to help bring speeds down in their own village. We're working hard to increase that. We want to see more police supporting that process, more actual enforcement alongside the advisory letters. And between us, communities and police are going to do a bigger job. It's been bad news the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think we've lost 4 people. Additional, Helen, killed on the roads. Over the year it was 21, so in a few weeks that's quite a considerable toll. I think 3 out of the 4 were older, and I think there was issues around, there's some sort of trend around people being on the wrong side of the road. So there's something underneath that, but that's a terrible loss of life, and we need to be maintaining the pressure. You'll keep hearing that from us, Chairman, and I know you have an eye to this, and we're in the same place on it. We want to make our roads even safer. This budget continues to invest in that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Edgeler.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioner. My question really is, you put on in your budget £18 million on one side for a firing range. Is this a still ongoing project, or is it something you're still discussing? And the other thing is, you've put on one side again, or to give Stoke-on-Trent £58,000 to help with their local financial arrangements, challenges. Can you please explain why? Thank you.
I'm really pleased with the capital programme in this budget. It's a fundamental piece of work to the organisation, particularly around investment in buildings, efficient buildings, in IT and so on. There are organisations that really struggle to fund their capital investment properly, and it means, unfortunately, people on the front line don't have the tools they need to sort out the criminals. The firing range is part of that. The organisation at the moment uses a site in the countryside. It is not fit for purpose, in my view. It does the job. I'm pleased to say that we've arranged or agreed a continuation of using that in the short term, so there's no immediate pressure, but there is a short-term pressure to provide proper training facilities for the firearms team. There are over 100 people fully trained in Staffordshire. They are there to respond to incidents, some of the most serious ones around organised crime, drugs trading and counter-terrorism exercises. The training demand is increasing all the time. An awful lot of that delivery is done now from vehicles. So the capacity to bring vehicles onto your training facility and work through the exercises is really important, something they can't do effectively at the minute. It's simply not fit for purpose. What I haven't been convinced of in the 9 months since I've been in position is that we've got a properly finished business case. I think there are some questions about the location. I think there's questions about the size of the range. I'm exploring all sorts of opportunities, including possibly sharing that facility with other forces. One thing I do know is that having space and renting it out barely covers the cost. It doesn't. So, a shared opportunity, but making sure it's the right size for what we need and the right fit. There's also a question of national regulation. They may be looking for a different type of range to before. So this is an ongoing conversation. Now that's really why the amount in the budget hasn't changed from last year. It's not a finger in the air. It's more detailed than that. And last year, it included for an operations centre on top of the driving range, all located at HQ. Well, that's all been reviewed. We certainly aren't going to have an operations centre on top of a firing range. But because of the increased costs and inflation in building at the minute, the savings actually mean the budget pretty much comes back to where it was. So this is something for us all to keep our eyes on. But I'm not up for spending money unnecessarily or having gold-plated when silver's good enough. Now, your second question about Stoke, I'm afraid you caught me totally unawares. What are you referring to there? Have you got a place in the papers or something?
Yes. Just let me... 25. Sorry, I haven't written it down, but it is in there about assisting the Stoke-on-Trent.
I'm happy to come back to that if we can find it, if you can point us in the right direction.
I will. I'll have a
Perhaps
look
come
at that.
back in a bit.
Yep, thank you.
Is that okay with you, Chairman?
Yes, fine. Okay,
Thank you.
Mrs. Edgeler, thank you. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioner and David. Welcome. Can I just pick up on the precept, please, of 4.19% again, and just to follow on from my colleague Keith. I think the public, as you rightly say, will look at why 4.19%, and I think you've articulated very well, Commissioner, why you would want to invest up front, and that we all know as councillors and being out in the community that the number one and two concerns often are contacting the police generally and for a wait time, so the investment in the extra 15 staff is really welcome, and obviously Bob is on the beat, another great thing we're seeing, so I'm really in favour of that, so I congratulate you on that. And actually I met with the Chief of Cannock on Friday, and the model that you've talked about in terms of neighbourhood policing, that was exactly what was relayed to me. So again, it's nice to see what you're articulating here is already being felt and seen on the ground. But just going forward, ultimately, people who are being asked to pay that amount of money will want to see results. So it's a general question really, but in terms of holding the chief to account and communicating that message to the public down the line, what would success look like for you? Because obviously visibility and picking up the phone are two important things, but they're only one part of your plan overall. I appreciate that's a bit of an open question.
It's the right question, and I don't know whether any of you saw the public performance meeting I had with the new Chief Constable last week, but we were very upfront in presenting data. I'm really keen that we present the same charts, the same information publicly every quarter. Quite frankly, we're just not where we need to be on contact or response at the moment. There are very clear, actually the targets of the organisation. If we could hit those, that would help, because we're some way off. And I expect within months that we will be. But then we're going to set some new targets around what people expect and what is doable. The 15 in the contact centre is just the start. There's another 30 odd, I think. We heard from the lead officer on that last week, coming in over the next 6 months. It takes a little while to train them up, but that will make a significant difference. It's so important to... this isn't about shouting at anybody. It's about coming back with a reliable set of data to say, have you got to where you said you were going to get? If you haven't, are you satisfied the plan's going to get us there? If you're not, can we have a new plan, please? Because we ain't patient forever. This has to improve. So the public performance meetings will be one way. I'm also intending to make public the sort of in regular updates through my website, things like that, where the plan priorities are being delivered or not delivered on. But also to give extra visibility on the national measures. We've got a new beating crime plan. Some of them aren't so important to Staffordshire, thank goodness, around homicide and issues that really matter in difficult cities in the country. But others, for example, burglary, acquisitive crime, neighbourhood crime, antisocial behaviour, they matter here as well. And I'm not looking to beat other places, but I want to make sure we're doing as well, if not better. So you will see that being more visible, I think, than you have in the past. Now we've got a consistent set of things to measure against.
Thank you. Any more questions, colleagues? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, both. Two questions. First of all, a detailed one, if you wouldn't mind. But on the capital programme, refer to some work at the HQ site across a number of buildings. I'm on page 34, I think, if that helps. And bearing in mind, the force hasn't been there that long, 15 years, something like that. But those alterations come to about 1.5 million, which seems quite a lot of money. And also, I'm a bit intrigued on one of them that it talks about, for example, block 6, additional work to support additional technology and business culture investment. And it's a very minor point, but I'm a bit intrigued what that rather grand phrase means. Would you like to do that one first, or do you want my second question now? I'll do it either way. Take that one? Okay.
Yeah. It is rather grand statement, isn't it? Weirdly, one of the big... got some feedback here from somewhere, haven't I?
That's me.
Is that me? Or? Weirdly, the pandemic has meant that we've made an absolute step change in remote technologies. Teams meetings are a pain, but they're also a very effective way of having more frequent meetings and getting people that matter involved when otherwise they wouldn't have been able to travel. So there's a huge investment now in equipping the frontline officers and staffs with the mean to work remotely. So it means more laptops, it means docking stations and screens when they do come into bases. It means they can do their reports, statements, move on their record management systems from home or from partners' locations or from an incident site. It's all part of that package. We've actually got spaces that are designed for a different way of working. We've got phones on desks, which quite frankly aren't used anymore. So there'll be changes to more mobile technology there as well. Some of that in Block 6 will be around presentation. So where we've got meetings where we're presenting business cases, working through decisions, there'll be opportunities to present better and present remotely as well. The last 6 months we've had a lot of hybrid meetings where some people are in, some people aren't in. It's really important that those that aren't in the building can fully engage. So that's part of the picture. I must say I've been reasonably impressed with the way that site's held up. Some of the buildings there are, they're not what you designed today, but they're not bad. But understanding how we can squeeze more people in, particularly how we can train so many people in this uplift, because that is not something anybody was expecting when those buildings were put into place. And the increased demand on training expectations and so on. It means they're constantly being remodelled. The good news from my perspective is one of few alternative arrangements to occupy external buildings and other buildings we haven't had to do, because we can work on the site we've already got. And I think where we can do that, we should. You got a second question?
Thank you. Second question, more general one. For most budgets, whether it's at home or police or fire, it's a matter of slicing up the cake, isn't it, appropriately. And I just wondered, in budgets, therefore, there are winners and losers, and I just wondered whether there are areas where, as it were, they've had to lose out because the budget is finite, where there are areas that you'd really like to spend more money on, but you've had to agree the preferences and leave some things out of the equation. I'm mixing my metaphors now. But you have to leave some things to one side, and I was just curious what one or two of those might be. You've had to say, well, for this year or the next few years, we can't do that much as we would like to because we've had to focus on something else instead.
Not much, thankfully. What we are asking the support services to do is support an organisation that's 20%, well, frontline police-wise, 20% bigger, and they aren't 20% bigger. So the investment in HR, back office, finance, all the rest of those supportive elements. there's been increases, but they're constrained. So we're really asking them to manage these new people into the service with no extra allowance in this set of budgets going forward, which I think is quite significant. The chief is always going to want more officers, and I expect him to keep asking for them. Between us, we'll find some savings and we'll get more officers. But we're not going to keep going to the public to do that. We need an organisation that is right-sized. And actually there's a balance to be struck as well. The staff, the PCSO, the forensics experts, the computer experts, the people that manage relationships, partnerships, safeguarding, they're not necessarily warranted officers, but the type of crime we're tackling today, they are absolutely fundamental to doing the job. So I think in the next few years what we're going to see is a little less emphasis on warranted officers and a little more emphasis on specialists, staff. And what I'm very keen to do, I know government's keen to do this as well because they've told us they'll give us a right telling off, is if a force increases its officer numbers but reduces its staff to try and keep the budget square, they want what the public want, which is more of both. Affordable, with the latest technology, working effectively, and that's what we've got to try and deliver.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A couple of might be a bit techie, Ben, so you might have to pass over to Dave. I'm not doubting your abilities, I hasten to add. On page 22, there's an assumptions chart, and this insurances, which is 30%, dropping to 2.5% the next year. What exactly is that?
This is what David's here for.
I thought it might be here, Ben.
It is, but I'm not sure I can answer it actually, Steve. I'll have to come back to you on it. I'm assuming it's something to do with the with some of the taxes that are on insurance, but I'd have to refer back. I can't answer that.
Oh. Yeah, if you could then, please, David.
One question.
Well, yeah. Next one is on page 30. Was it page 30? It doesn't help this because you have two sets of numbers on these things. I have a figure. Oh no, I can't find it. Let's go to another page. Let's do 36. I know where that is. 35, 36. We talk on this one about, on page 36, CCTV upgrade various sites. Stafford, Longton, Burton, Burslem and Cheadle. What's that? Is that on police stations or in the general sort of town centres?
They'll be specifically on the police stations. They'll be on police sites. I'm pretty sure of that. Yeah, they'll be on police locations.
Right. The next question was going to be, can we have some money for Newcastle? But it's on actual stations. Okay, fine. I'm sure you can see that one coming. On page 28, we have we have a third party it's a third party budget on page 28. I'm trying to find where it is. I'm not quite sure what that meant.
Payments, third party payments, wasn't it?
Yeah. I'll just go back a bit before. It doesn't help, I've got two sets of numbers. Here we are, yeah, 24 million down to 13 million. So what's that, Dave?
Yeah, so the reason it's dropped is basically the way the regional organised crime unit's accounted for and the way it's dealt with. So actually you see a drop there, but if you look, you can see an increase within Yeah, so the third-party payments has dropped out, I say because of the regional organised crime unit. And then we see a reduction, so there's a reduction It is, yeah, but it's difficult to see where it is exactly within the report. Quite happy to come back on that if that's it.
Well, Chairman, can we come back in detail on that one as well? But that is primarily the regional arrangements, which are worth a mention actually. We've been having some detailed conversations with our partners. As you know, the ROCU, the Regional Organised Crime Unit, is quite a substantial commitment for us. We pay about 17% of their budget, which after grants is about £26 million. I was encouraged to learn that in not so many years, we've gone from 200 to nearly 600 officers in that organised crime unit. It's primarily based in the West Midlands, but they do work across Staffordshire, Warwickshire and West Mercia as well. And they are being exceptionally successful at dealing with organised crime and county lines type work. Government sees more going in that direction. I'm very keen that if government wants more going in that direction, it shouldn't be at the cost of our local oversight and direction of it, because I want my share in Staffordshire. And that's a considerable investment. We put officers in and also resource part of the infrastructure. So it's a key piece of work, but we've got an accounting issue there that I think needs just some further explanation. On the insurances one, Stephen, I have a funny feeling that should be 3% dropping to 2, not 30. I think it's just a typo, but again, we'll confirm that as well.
Yeah, at the end of the meeting, Commissioner, I'm going to summarise what we'd like to see over the next 3 and 6 months, and I'll try and capture some of the points as we sweep that up.
Thank you.
Okay, the last one I've got is on the page 30. Disposals, budget reduction, headline estates costs due to the ongoing collaboration with FRS around shared estates, £312,000. Can you put a bit more meat on the bones on that one, David?
Yeah, sure. Can I just go back to the other question as well? So you talked about the ROCU, so that's right, I asked that very question. I asked the question that you've asked, so part of that reduction, you can see in the grants and contributions, it's basically got lower income and lower costs, it's just the way the account has been done for. So you can see that drop in on the grants and contributions line. Sorry, Stephen, what was the other question? Sorry, page 30. Could you just point me to which line was it? So basically, what this will be reflecting the savings that are coming through following the sharing of estate with fire. So predominantly two large sites, Tamworth and at Hanley. So the policing is sharing both of those sites now, moved into the fire station. So it's now a joint hub. So this savings coming through because of the basically the existing police station in Hanley that's being disposed of, and also the savings from the disposal of the Tamworth site is reduced in savings and lower operating costs for Staffordshire Police.
Thank you. Mrs. Edgeley, did you want to come back with a question?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I'm sorry I cannot find this, but I've written it down here, so I've not made it up. But I will find it about the £58,000 Stoke-on-Trent. I really wanted to ask the Commissioner, what is the future of Stafford Police Station, please? It's in the report about it could be altered or it could be moved. And I wondered what your up-to-date information was. Thank you.
We're reviewing, well, we're continually reviewing all of the locations and the new operating model will affect that. It actually means a more substantial commitment to a key station in each locality, because they'll be managing their own response again. Now, whether Stafford, with the location in the town centre, is the best place, we're not too sure. I know the Chief Constable wants to retain some very local neighbourhood capacity serving the town centre, but it might not be the ideal location for response in the way that it currently is. So that's part of just a constant review. And also, I'm very aware if we've got towns with plans, they've got government money to improve town centres, and we've got an asset that is not necessarily complementing that I'm up for a conversation about freeing up the economic benefit, and we've been doing that all across the county in Tamworth and other places as well. So for me, it's about or Newcastle, where we've actually put a station into the hub there as part of their town centre plan. So it goes both ways, but there's nothing specific about Stafford at the moment, although, as you're aware, it's right on the edge of that development site. It's okay as a building, but in fact there's quite a big backlog of repair costs to bring it up to spec. If the alternative is a better location and a better building, then we'll be doing that.
Thank you. Can I just come back? You know, I sit on here representing Stafford as their representative, so that's the reason I asked the question, because a lot of people are concerned that we might lose the police station as well, so hence my question to you.
If I may, Anne, there are people that get very anxious about stations. They think stations is policing. It isn't. Stations are tasking once or twice a day. Here's where you're going today, here's what you're doing, this is the priority, get on with it. There's your locker. Policing is out in the community. It's on the roads, it's in the areas where there's issues, it's doing the job. And we've got some buildings that aren't very good, quite frankly, for the staff to operate from. And we've got locations where if you're in a vehicle and you've got to get somewhere quickly, being in a town centre is not necessarily the best place. Being just outside on the ring road could be spot on. So I will continually look at that. But I think we'd all appreciate that, certainly around our main towns, making sure the service is in touch and can patrol and be there around public spaces is very important.
Thank you. If I could just go back to a point that Mr. Sweeney touched on earlier, and let me declare an interest here from East Staffordshire Borough Council. I'm a cabinet member with responsibility for CCTV, but there's an item in the paper that talks about 50k this year for CCTV in several districts within Staffordshire. Now, is that just a one-year allocation? Because the concerns from colleagues who I've spoken to around the districts is that in an emergency of any description, the police will want to use that CCTV, but there is a reluctance to make a significant contribution towards it. Now, is that a fair comment? Are you able to address that point in any way in terms of perhaps rethinking the amount that's going to be allocated?
I think that particular line, which you've referred to, and Stephen Sweeney did too, Stafford, Longton, Burton, Burslem, Cheadle, 4 of those are definitely station locations. I'm not
They're
sure.
stations.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Cheadle, but as David said, I think those are upgrades to the CCTV to protect vehicles and assets on the stations.
Right.
They're not community CCTV.
Okay, thank you. Yes, over there, yep.
Just a quickie on Cheadle, it is your police station. We've just put public CCTV up there.
Thank you. Right. Are there any more questions, colleagues? No? Right, thank you. Commissioner, perhaps in summary at this part of the agenda, we're I think we have an item planned for October for a revisit to the MTFS and progress. And we've said many times that we are a new committee. You're the new commissioner. We would like a written progress report in 3 months against a selection of demonstrable points that I can perhaps share with you after the meeting. Because we'd like to monitor progress. We want to be abreast of progress, because this is an incredibly important document. And if we don't make progress, we're going nowhere. So we'll give you notice of that. I would think the request will be for a report by the end of May on progress to date and identifying any specific items that aren't on programme, any significant deviation from the budget, or anything else that you feel is relevant for this committee to know. And I'm sure that we will have thought of a few things as well.
Chairman, if I may, this budget is essentially from April. So I'm very happy to bring a Q1 report, but it would be later in the year. If you want to see one in May, it will be essentially double checking our forecasts against the previous budget year-end position. It's not a problem because I'm all over that every quarter in terms of slippages against budgets and things, and I'll be very disappointed if this budget's compromised by something that happens in the next 3 months. But happy to take your lead as to which you see and when.
We did touch on that in our pre-meeting. I think we were pitching it in April, thinking it was, well, we knew it wasn't from now, but we may not have put enough weight behind our thinking that this is from April onwards. So we'll step back from that interim report at the end of May for the time being, because I don't think a month in will show us too much. But I will come back if we need any clarity on that. Thank you. Right. If there are no more questions on that item 5 on the agenda, let us move on then now to item... Oh, yes. Thank you. I've just been informed an item that I'd forgotten about. What we'd like to do now, Commissioner, is adjourn, just to consider all the replies that you've given us today before we make any sort of final decision on what our position is. So it's 3:20. If we could come back at 3:30, I'm sure that would suit us all. So at this point, then, we'll adjourn for the time being. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I think we're all here. Thank you, Commissioner, for that presentation, and your colleague. We found it very enlightening and welcomed it. And I can say that we have unanimously agreed to accept the recommendations in the report, and that includes the 4.19 precept. I'd like to go on now to say that we would like a review of the MTFS in 6 months' time. I think the date we've identified is around about the 24th of October. And an interim report at the end of the first quarter. A written report will do. And if you could forward that to Mandy Patterson, she will see that it's distributed to each of us in turn. And that's important that we get that, noting the points that we made earlier about us, your first year, and we are a new committee, and we really want to make it clear to you that we are here to support, but if there's a need to challenge any aspect of that, we'll be minded to do so. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 6 on the agenda, decisions published by the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. There are several there. Is there a need to drill into any of those, or can we note them all? Thank you then. I'll take that as they're noted. Item 7 on the agenda, the Chief Executive appointment. I think we made a passing reference to that earlier on, Commissioner. Is there any more you'd like to say?
No, and apologies, Chairman, I didn't spot that on the agenda. That would have been a more appropriate point to mention the interim arrangements.
Right, thank you. And I think on behalf of this panel and our predecessors, we'd like to extend grateful thanks to Glenn for his dedication and very hard work. And of course, he was always there, which is a key factor in any organisation. So please pass our thanks on to him at the first available opportunity. Item 8 on the agenda, questions to the Commissioner by any panel members. Are there any other questions over and above the ones we've talked about on the MTFS? Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Ben, I know when you came to Newcastle a few weeks ago, obviously you love Newcastle, like we all do, but we had our two street wardens who do a pseudo sort of policing job, but I feel they're probably somewhat cheaper than police officers. And I think we raised the question of the possibility of you perhaps contributing towards their wages, thus releasing officers to do other jobs. Have you thought about that at all, or any comeback on that?
I enjoyed my visit to Newcastle. I've had 2 or 3 actually, and we went for a walk around, and we saw some of the things that are concerning, and it was very enlightening. I don't think I got the question quite so directly as I have today about would I like to fund street wardens.
Contribute to the funding, not funding.
No, actually I don't think the police budget is for that. However, what I would say is that we've got a community safety forum on Friday, which I think a fair few of you may be either coming to or aware of. One of the things I'm going to be announcing at that is a continuation of the Commissioner's funding for local community safety partnerships. Some areas have stopped funding their local community safety partnerships. It's more retained by the Commissioner's office. I don't think that's sensible. I think in Newcastle you've got specific priorities. The town centre's one of them. I think other places have got different priorities, and it's really important that you make local decisions. So there's getting on, I think, for £750,000 going to the county partnerships. I think that's an appropriate means of partly funding priorities. I'm also looking to get some feedback from you on a couple of grant schemes which mean that the pot gets to close to £1 million. Some of it's around antisocial behaviour, some of it's around getting community groups to assist you with tackling local priorities. And it's through those sorts of programmes that I would hope to directly fund the thing that you see as a priority. But essentially, maintaining that high street in its attractive form is something for the conversation between you and your council taxpayers. What I'll be committing to do is making sure the police resource there is maximised and continues to work really closely with you to keep everybody safe in Newcastle.
If I could just ask one more question, Chairman. Another thing that tends to be raised a lot is the throughput of officers. You get used to them and they're gone. Now in Newcastle, Chief Inspector Duffy is getting promoted to superintendent, and good luck. He's a good officer. I hope he does very, very well. But again, it's another change. And when I first got elected on the borough in 2006, we had sort of a pool of senior officers that didn't really change. And now it seems a year, 2 years, they're moving on, they're moving on, they're moving on. And that continuity is something, I mean, Bill Phil's got a better job, good luck to him. But it is a bit of stability would help, I think.
Thanks, Councillor Sweeney. I agree with you. I think it is, I tell you what, it's really disappointing if you lose a good commander. It's not quite so disappointing if they're not a good commander. We're very lucky at the moment. We've got some fantastic local commanders, and I'm hearing this from everywhere. You know, don't let's not lose Phil Duffy in Newcastle. Let's not lose Dave Wayne in South Staffs or whatever it is, because they're really good people. And I think they've done a great job actually in really connecting with the local partnership. You're also right to say that neither you nor I would not wish somebody like Phil the very best. He's going to Manchester, I believe, Greater Manchester. He's been promoted. He's been promoted for a reason, which is because he's damn good. And I'm sure he'll do a fine job there. And what I hope, actually, is he comes back to Staffordshire one day with the benefit of his experience. It's the nature of the job that those officers with ambition and skill develop themselves and move on. And you can do an awful lot in 2 or 3 years. I think I would say, if we look at how we work in councils, some of the best work's done in the first couple of years when you have a cabinet responsibility or a job within an authority. It's difficult to maintain that level of commitment and bring new things in. You start to defend what you've done rather than responding. So 2 or 3 years feels like the right sort of time for me. But I do appreciate that we need the community to have an opportunity to retain and make a relationship. With the new model, I think you'll see a chance, because we've got chief inspectors. I think you'll see a chance to speak to more than one person in your location and really build up that continuity as they develop.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. I was wondering what your thoughts were, Commissioner, on the joint commander of the Lichfield Division and Tamworth Division, because that has been put currently the case.
Mr. Cox, you might be slightly behind the times, because my understanding is we're not going to have a joint commander. My understanding is we're going to have a chief inspector for both and an inspector for both. An earlier draft of the operating model proposals was that there would be some sharing of the chief inspector, although there'd still be a local commander. But in fact, that's not what's going to progress. So from day one, each locality will have its own chief inspector and inspector, its own response team, its own harm reduction team, its own neighbourhood team. And I think we're going to have some real accountability and sense of place ownership. And it ought to feel good and work. So I'm really glad you asked me that. It's not often I catch you out.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes?
Thank you. I didn't really want to bring this up today, but Newcastle's been mentioned. I had a few phone calls the other day. I don't know why I get them, because I'm not in Newcastle. But it would appear Newcastle's now nice to walk through. But the crowd, shall we say, have moved to the rugby pitch behind the A34 there, just off the A34. And I've had a couple of phone calls to tell me that the few cars have had their mirrors kicked in. They've been reported to the police, didn't turn up. But I was going to have a word with Mr. Sweeney rather than with you. But it just seems to move around, doesn't it? You clear one area up and they've moved to somewhere else. It's just a statement. Thank you.
I take it on board. Please, those people that phone you, do pass on what you know to the local representatives, and so that I get that through the right format, and really encourage them to report the stuff directly to the service. They can't deal with it otherwise. But glad that you have experienced what I experienced, which is a really positive walk through the town. Around Christmas, that was important because a lot of people enjoy themselves.
Mrs. Edgeler.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, what are your thoughts on the new thinking about road safety, and probably it's in Helen's domain actually, about the new highways codes that's come out regarding cyclists, and do you feel that it should be mandatory that they wear helmets? I'd like your thoughts on that, please. Thank you.
I'm not sure about that, Mrs. Edgeler, really, for the Commissioner, but...
The highway code stuff is something that we support. Pedestrians first, cyclists, horse riders, cars, right through to HGVs. So it's essentially, where there's the potential for most harm is with those heavy vehicles. Helen and I paid a visit to a resolution centre in Cannock, where they get a lot of input, particularly from cyclists, about vehicles passing too close. And it is a genuine concern. I think during the pandemic, we all enjoyed our walks, thank goodness. And I think that most drivers are more aware, perhaps as having been walkers or cyclists. Keep that distance, maintain it, wait until it's safe to pass. So it's all sensible, I think. And I don't know about the helmets. Was that actually specified in the... No. Yeah. I think if you're on a bike, you should wear a helmet. You don't want to fall off and hurt your head any more than you need to.
Okay. Mr. Jones, yes.
You're not a question on national policy. A point about what I've raised with you before in your predecessor, Mr. Adams, and what I'm really pleased to see now is the consultation that's taking place around whether we want PCSOs to have extended powers, i.e. specifically the complaint that I used to get as a county council about parking outside schools, and actually it only came through to the community safety team, and me as my portfolio position, I was asked the question. And I've made a point of going out to all the county councillors across Cannock Chase, and to a person, it won't come as a surprise that they all said they really, really supported that. I appreciate it's only consultation at this stage, so I'm hopeful rather than confident, but just the fact that you've taken that back to the chief and it's come out to us for our opinions on, I'm grateful for, and hopefully we'll get the right result. Thank you.
I'm pleased because I've had this question raised here, but also at a number of the forums, and I've discussed it with the Chief Constable. In an ideal world, I think he and I would want the same thing, that if a PCSO needed an officer to come and enforce, that the officer would be there. That's the ideal. I think the new model will allow for that to happen more often, and it may be that the local impression that it would help for PCSOs to have additional powers might fall off as a result of more officer availability. So I think we've got to see. That would be the ideal. He also, like me, and I think I've mentioned it here before, recognises that part of the PCSO's strength is in fact they're often in a less confrontational conversation with individuals than an officer would be. So keeping that delineation is quite valuable. But I think to hear back from the public is really important. We've got a chief constable who listens to the staff, listens to people locally, representatives, because you all have heard from him, and he wants to hear from the public as well, and I couldn't support that more. We'll see where it goes.
Last one, Mrs. Edgeler.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask the Commissioner, do you have any in your remit? Does it include sitting in any government forums where you can help decide on sentences for people?
Councillor Edge and Chairman, not specifically. At the moment, I'm on a national thing around fire standards. So I'm part of agreeing new standards for fire service delivery, which is very interesting. And of course, I'm on a local criminal justice board where we work with CPS, probation, courts. Now, there's no legislation opportunities there, and I'm not influencing judges directly, but there are valuable opportunities to talk about things like out-of-court disposals, conditional discharges, treatment orders. So that might be advising somebody that they have a 6-8 week course around domestic abuse or drugs or alcohol. If they see the course through, good. If they don't, they're back for some sort of other sentence. Now that's in my plan. Please don't forget to take the document. It's in the plan because I think there is value in that. More than anything, because people will see justice sooner, particularly with the court's backlog at the moment. Why wait 18 months for a fine when somebody could have had some positive treatment intervention? And if it works, it's worked. So I am encouraging of more of those alternatives to sentencing. How long people, if they have to go to prison, how long they're there for, the nature of that is down to the judiciary.
Yeah, perhaps just on that point, I understand that the magistrates' courts are going to be given increased powers for sentencing any time now. So custodial sentences are a last resort, I would suggest, but their sentencing powers could see someone in custody for a year. But that's not a matter for us, I don't think, today. Commissioner, we've come to the end now, and I'd just like to leave you with one message that's been quite a drumbeat message for us, I think, and frame it in the concept of the precept going to 4.19%. It's vital that the community see that they're getting value for money. Now, how that's delivered is a matter for you and the Chief Constable, but I'm sure we'll come back to visit that again fairly soon if we get, well, the 3-month report, the quarterly report will be very helpful. So if I could just leave that message with you, and thank you for your presentation today. Thank you for all the information that's been provided and the contribution from all of the members that are with us today. And so with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you. Sorry, excuse me, one final point. I'd forgotten my colleague. Sorry, go on.
I'm sorry, Chair. Councillor Adams wasn't able to attend the meeting today, but she wanted me to formally record, her thanks to both the fire and the police for the work on the Leopard public house in Burslem.
Certainly, yes.
Just on that, in fact, there's I went to see the site on Thursday evening with the council leader and the local MP. The Leopard, for anybody who hasn't been there, it's 1795, I think, this public house, and it's an impressive double-fronted building. The judges never really used to go underground to it from the town hall. It's a phenomenal place. But I went round the back. It's enormous. It's about a dozen rooms deep, 4 floors high. Chief Fire Officer said it was a horrible job. 9 appliances, a high ladder. Saving it was impossible. This is 250-year-old timbers gone. It was a real worry. There was a fine by police activity proactively the week before of a cannabis farm on the site. So there's investigations as to how this happened. The electricity was off to the site, so it unlikely to have been as a result of that. But suffice to say, there's investigations. What we're really hopeful of is that they might be able to retain and save the facade of the building and put something safer and more modern behind it to the benefit of Burslem. There's some beautiful buildings in Burslem, absolutely beautiful. But being old, they're extremely vulnerable. And it was such a pity, really upset people. And Chairman, the fire service today, an awful lot of them are at a funeral because they lost one of their firefighters at Christmas to a heart attack. Hopefully you could just hold Dave Hill and his family in your thoughts for a little while this evening.
Yes, please pass our condolences on to his loved ones and family.
But they've had a busy time the last few weeks. There are quite considerable activity for the fire service and they're working very hard.
Yes, and we'll be forever grateful for that. So,
but I just want to make the panel aware of the Commissioner's public performance meetings with the Stafford Chief Constable, which I watched actually yesterday, and I found it very, very interesting. So panel, I think the next one's in April, am I right? Yeah. So it would be good. I just wanted the panel to be aware of it. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Mrs. Edgelove. So I'll say it again then. We'll close the meeting now and thank you for all in attendance. Thank you.